I never thought a quiet morning at my lake cabin would turn into a full-blown HOA nightmare. I was sitting on my porch, coffee in hand, listening to the soft lapping of the water against the dock, thinking life was perfect, when I saw her, Karen. You know the type, clipboard in hand, shoes clicking against the wooden planks, and that unnerving "I'm here to help" smile that made your skin crawl. She leaned against my fence like she owned the place. "Good morning," she chirped, though there was nothing cheerful about the way her eyes scanned my property as if she was inspecting me personally. "I was thinking," she continued, "maybe we could do a little swap, your cabin for mine. It's better for the HOA layout." I blinked, not sure I'd heard her right. "Swap cabins?" I asked. I forced a polite smile. No, thanks, I really like my place." Her smile froze. There was a flicker of annoyance, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The kind that tells you just stepped on a landmine and it's about to blow. "Well," she said slowly, tilting her head, "we'll see about that." And with a dramatic flip of her hair, she walked away, clipboard clutched like a weapon. I shook my head, laughing nervously to myself. "What just happened?" I muttered, but deep down a knot had formed in my stomach. I should have known then that quiet mornings at the lake were over. The next day, Karen returned, this time with a list of complaints. My dock wasn't perfectly straight. My lawn wasn't trimmed according to HOA aesthetic standards. My boat, apparently it was parked too aggressively angled. I tried to joke. "You know, Karen, my dock has a mind of its own. I think it's rebelling." She didn't laugh. Instead, she scribbled notes furiously, giving me that condescending nod that said, "You'll regret this." By the end of the week, it was clear she wasn't here to make friends. She visited almost daily, each time finding new things to criticize. A chair out of place, a garden gnome facing the wrong direction, a mailbox that was not symmetrical with the neighbor. Every little thing became a potential violation. And it wasn't just the visits. It was the way she spoke to me, like she was auditioning for a drama show. The tone, the gestures, the exaggerated sighs, it was exhausting. Every knock on the door, every pointed finger over the fence made me want to run inside and hide. Neighbors started whispering behind her back. "She's obsessed with you," one said. "Watch out, she's looking for any excuse to make trouble." I laughed it off, trying to stay calm. But one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the lake gold, there was a knock on my door. A real knock, urgent, impatient. I opened it to find Karen, looking flustered, clutching her clipboard like it was a life preserver. Her voice was sharp. "You need to understand your refusal. It affects the community. It disrupts harmony. It's unacceptable." I stared. I didn't even know where to start. "It's just my cabin," I said. "I like it. I'm not moving." Her eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that," she said again, her words like a promise or a threat. I couldn't tell which. And with that, she slammed the gate behind her so hard that I half expected it to break. I went inside and poured myself another coffee, trying to calm down. But that's when it hit me. This wasn't going to be a simple "Karen has an opinion" kind of problem. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Something that would test my patience, my sanity, and maybe even my ability to survive a small-town HOA showdown. I didn't know it yet, but my peaceful lake cabin mornings were over. And Karen had officially made me her target. The day after her dramatic gate slam, I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen would give up. Maybe she'd realize I wasn't swapping cabins and she'd go bother someone else. I should have known better. Karen didn't just visit, she escalated. Every morning, it felt like she had set an alarm to inspect my cabin. One day, she showed up with a notebook so thick I wondered if she'd cataloged every single plank on my porch. "I noticed your dock has shifted slightly since last week," she said, peering over her glasses. "It could be dangerous." Dangerous? My dock was perfectly fine, but I didn't argue. I smiled and said, "You're right. I should probably tether it with a chain and a prayer." She didn't laugh. That twitch in her jaw told me she was mentally cataloging this as another violation. Every little thing became evidence. My lawn, not aligned with her imaginary HOA aesthetic. My garden gnome, facing the wrong way. My mailbox, symmetry crime. She found something every day. And she didn't just complain silently. No, Karen had a flair for performance. She would march across my yard, flap papers, sigh dramatically, point, then scribble notes as if she were scoring a reality TV competition. Neighbors started noticing. I overheard one woman whisper, "She's targeting you, I think she's obsessed." Another neighbor muttered, "She's like a storm cloud that follows him around." I tried humor because if you can't laugh, you'll cry. I waved at Karen one morning and said, "Careful, that dock of mine might snap under all that HOA energy you're throwing at it." Karen blinked, then she wrote furiously in her notebook. The real kicker came one evening. I was trimming my small flower beds, humming a tune, when I heard a knock that rattled my nerves more than usual. I opened the door, and there she stood. Full glare, clipboard out, breath heavy like she'd sprinted from the community hall. "You know," she began, her voice low like a storm about to break, "your refusal to swap cabins, it's not just a personal choice. It disrupts harmony. It sets a bad example. Others might follow suit." I blinked. Follow suit? Karen, they already love their cabins. Trust me, I'm not leading a rebellion. Her eyes narrowed. She leaned in slightly, like she was about to whisper a secret, but instead shouted, "We all have rules here and everyone must obey them." I almost laughed. Everyone must obey them, except her, apparently, who made up new rules whenever she got bored. I went inside, trying to calm down, thinking maybe ignoring her would make her go away. But the next day, she upped the ante. She left a note on my porch. "Failure to comply may result in community action." Community action. The words sounded innocuous, but coming from Karen, I knew it was code for "I will make your life miserable." Over the next week, things escalated further. She would show up when I was out fishing, taking photos of my cabin as evidence of noncompliance. I'd come back from a hike and find her packing near the lake, scribbling notes while glaring at the water like it had personally offended her. One morning, I caught her peeking through the blinds of my neighbor's cabin, muttering to herself. At that point, it was no longer about a swap. It was about control. My cabin had become her personal mission. I confided in a few neighbors, trying to gauge if anyone else had experienced her theatrics. One older gentleman shook his head. "You're lucky she hasn't called the cops yet," he said gravely. And I say lucky lightly. I laughed nervously, but something in his tone set my stomach in knots. Could Karen really escalate to that level, call the cops over a cabin dispute? My mind refused to go there, yet. Then late one night I heard it, a soft knock at the door. I opened it cautiously, half expecting to see a raccoon. Instead, Karen was standing there, clipboard like a shield, eyes wide with outrage. "You need to understand something," she hissed, voice trembling with fury. "If you continue to defy me, there will be consequences. You're undermining the entire community." I stared, trying not to laugh at the drama. "Karen, I'm just living my life," I said calmly. "I don't want your cabin, I'm not breaking rules, and I'm definitely not undermining anything." Her jaw tightened. She muttered something about everyone seeing and slammed the door so hard the latch rattled. I leaned against my porch, heart racing, realizing I was officially in the middle of a full-blown HOA storm. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. It was a calm morning, the kind where the sun hits the lake just right and you think maybe today will be peaceful. I was trimming my flower beds, humming to myself when I saw her coming down the path. Karen, of course. Clipboard in hand, eyes narrowed like a hawk spotting prey. "Good morning," I said cautiously, hoping maybe she'd just wave and move on. She didn't wave, she stopped, planted her feet firmly and stared. "We need to talk about the cabin swap," she said, not suggested, not politely mentioned. "Talk, as in you will comply and we will discuss how you'll do it." I tried to smile. "Karen, I already said no. I love my cabin. It's not for sale, it's not for swap, and—" "You will comply," she interrupted, voice sharp enough to slice through the calm lake air. My smile faltered. She took a deep breath, leaned closer, and dropped the line that would send chills through any HOA member's soul. "If you don't swap cabins, I'll have to report this as disrupting HOA harmony." I blinked, I stared at her, I almost laughed. "Report me for what, not swapping cabins?" Her eyes flashed. "Yes, you are creating discord. You are setting a bad example for the community. This is serious." I wanted to say something witty, but my brain kept tripping over itself. I settled for, "Karen, it's my cabin. I live here. I'm not harming anyone." Her voice lowered into a whisper, though it carried all the menace of a hurricane. "You'll see. You'll see what happens when rules are ignored." Then she turned sharply and walked away, leaving her clipboard clutched so tightly I half expected the paper to crumple. She slammed the gate behind her, the echo reverberating across the lake. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the sudden pounding in my chest. For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about what she said. Report this as disrupting harmony. Did she even know what that meant? Was there an actual rule, or had Karen just invented one on the spot because I refused her? By evening, it became clear. This wasn't going away. I peeked out the window and saw her walking past, peering into my neighbor's yards as if inspecting for accomplices. I couldn't tell if she was checking for evidence or just practicing her dramatic flair, but either way, it was unnerving. I decided to document everything. I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures. My dock, my mailbox, the flower beds she complained about, even the exact spot where she had slammed the gate. If Karen was going to try something, I wanted proof. The neighbors noticed my sudden hypervigilance. One of them, Mrs. Patterson, shook her head and whispered, "You know she's going to call the cops eventually, right?" I laughed nervously. "Cops over a cabin swap? That's impossible." I should have known better. A few days later, she left a note in my mailbox. Not just any note. It was written in bold, dramatic letters, the kind that makes you feel like a legal threat is looming over your entire life. Failure to comply will result in community action. Community action. The words sent a shiver down my spine. Karen didn't just want me to swap cabins anymore, she wanted control. She wanted me to bend to her will, and she wasn't subtle about it. I spent the night packing my cabin, trying to figure out my next move. Should I confront her? Document more? Call the HOA council myself? Every option seemed risky, and every creak of the porch made me jump, half expecting Karen to appear like a villain in some low-budget drama. Then it hit me, I couldn't let her intimidation work. I loved my cabin. I wasn't giving it up. And I wasn't going to let one overzealous HOA president ruin my life. Little did I know, her next move would make me question if any peace at the lake was ever possible again. Because by the end of that week, the calm mornings were gone, replaced with tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Karen wasn't done, not by a long shot. I thought Karen's threats were just hot air. I really did. I mean, who actually calls the police over a cabin swap? Apparently, Karen does. It was early morning when I heard the sirens. Not far away, just close enough to make my heart skip a beat. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence. But then I saw the flashing lights reflecting on the lake, and that sinking feeling hit me. She called the cops. 2 officers approached my cabin, looking confused but polite. One of them gave me a small smile, like he wanted to say, "This can't be real." Karen was already there, standing at the edge of my porch like a general surveying a battlefield. Clipboard in hand, her posture straight, lips tight. "They're here because you stole my cabin," she announced, as if stating an undeniable fact. I almost laughed. "I stole your cabin, Karen, I live here, this is my property, my cabin, mine." Her eyes narrowed. "You know what you did, you're trying to manipulate the community," she yelled. The officers exchanged glances, clearly trying not to chuckle. I handed them my ownership papers, deeds, and receipts, explaining calmly, "This cabin belongs to me. I've had it for years. I don't know why she's making these claims." Karen flapped her arms, pointing at random spots on the property like a conductor leading an invisible orchestra. "She's been here. She's disrupted harmony. She's..." One officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, please calm down. Sir here has documents proving ownership. Unless there's criminal activity, there's nothing for us to do." Karen gasped like someone had just insulted her entire family tree. "Criminal activity? You can't see the..." Her voice broke mid-sentence, leaving her dramatic threat hanging in the air like smoke. I tried not to smirk. Watching Karen flail while the officers remained calm was surreal. She waved her clipboard, stomped, muttered, and finally settled for standing there, glaring at me as if sheer intensity could magically rewrite legal documents. The officers politely explained again that I hadn't broken any laws and that the dispute was a civil matter, not criminal. They left, shaking their heads slightly, and I finally exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. But Karen didn't leave. Oh no, she stayed until the officers were out of sight, muttering about next time, and you haven't seen the last of me. I watched her march down the driveway, head held high, as if she had just performed a heroic act for the greater good. After that, the neighborhood was buzzing. Some people couldn't stop talking about how she'd actually called the cops over a cabin. Others quietly muttered about her obsession with controlling everything. I just went back to my porch, sipping coffee and thinking, well, this is officially getting out of hand. The real challenge was realizing how far Karen was willing to go. If she could call the police over a cabin swap, what wouldn't she do? Letters? Fines? Another public spectacle. The suspense of it all was nerve-wracking and a little entertaining in a twisted way. I started documenting everything, even more meticulously than before. Every visit, every note, every glance. I was determined that if she tried anything else, I would be ready. That night, as the sun dipped behind the trees and painted the lake in shades of gold and crimson, I sat on my porch and thought about what was coming next. Karen wasn't just a person with a clipboard. She was a storm, unpredictable and relentless. And somehow I had to survive it without losing my sanity or my cabin. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come. Karen was just warming up, and her next move would push this from absurd HOA drama into full-on chaos. After the police visit, I thought maybe Karen would back off. Silly me. That would have been too easy. Instead, she escalated. Like a villain in a soap opera, she went from dramatic gate slams to official-looking letters slipped under my door. Thick, intimidating envelopes filled with HOA legal jargon, all claiming I was in violation of some imaginary property code. One of the letters made me laugh and then cringe. Your flower beds do not comply with HOA aesthetic guidelines, it said. I stared at my perfectly healthy daisies and marigolds. My flowers weren't rebelling, Karen was. Another letter complained my dock wasn't aligned for communal harmony. Communal harmony, my dock. I nearly spilled my coffee laughing. I realized I had to fight back, and not with anger, but with proof. I started collecting receipts, photos, emails, anything that could prove my ownership and compliance. Every time Karen showed up, I logged it. Every time she muttered about disrupting the community, I made a note. Neighbors began noticing. A few cautiously whispered support. You're handling this well, one woman said, handing me a plate of cookies. But be careful, Karen doesn't take no for an answer. I appreciated the cookies. The warning, not so much. I was starting to feel like a character in a bizarre reality show where the villain wore floral blouses and carried clipboards instead of swords. Then came the day she took it public. The HOA called a meeting, and everyone knew Karen would be there, armed with her letters, accusations, and general aura of doom. She arrived early, clipboard in hand, as if she were about to give a TED talk on how I was single-handedly destroying the community. I entered the meeting room, heart pounding, but I wasn't intimidated. I had my proof. I had witnesses. And I had nerves of steel, or at least I hoped I did. Karen started her dramatic monologue immediately. This is about protecting our community. This is about rules. This is about her. She refuses to swap cabins. She disobeys guidelines. She undermines harmony. Her hands flailed. She practically knocked over a stack of chairs in her enthusiasm. I sat quietly listening, suppressing a grin. This was her big performance, the crescendo of weeks of petty harassment, and I was about to ruin it with facts. When it was my turn, I calmly laid out the evidence. Deeds, receipts, dated photos, witness statements from neighbors who could confirm the timeline of events. I presented everything step by step, without drama, without yelling, just the truth. The room went silent. Karen's confidence faltered. She tried to interrupt, to add more theatrics, but the council members held up their hands. Every point she made crumbled under the weight of reality. And the best part? I could see it. Her thin smile was gone. Her dramatic flair faltered. Her clipboard shook slightly as she clutched it tighter, desperately looking for anything that might save her argument. But there was nothing. Every accusation she had made was either exaggerated or completely false. I had the proof. The council had the proof. And slowly, the weight of the absurdity of the situation began to sink in, not just for her, but for everyone watching. By the end of the meeting, Karen was left sputtering, muttering about rules and fairness, while everyone else shook their heads or tried to stifle laughter. The council clarified my rights, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm return. I walked out of that meeting thinking, Karen might be relentless, dramatic, and slightly unhinged, but as long as I stayed calm, collected, and armed with the truth, I could survive this storm. But the suspense wasn't over. Karen had another trick up her sleeve, and I knew she wouldn't go quietly. My cabin and my sanity were about to be tested like never before. After the HOA meeting, I thought I might finally get a reprieve. Maybe Karen would simmer down, realizing her theatrics hadn't worked. Wrong. If anything, she doubled down. The next morning, I found a new stack of flyers slipped under my door, announcing in bold letters that all residents must comply with HOA standards for harmony, with my cabin suspiciously highlighted in red ink. Neighbors were whispering more than ever. Some were quietly cheering me on, while others stared suspiciously, unsure whether I was the villain or just unfortunate enough to be in Karen's crosshairs. One neighbor even asked me, "Do you want me to stay over tonight in case she tries anything?" I waved them off with a laugh, though my stomach was doing somersaults. Karen had turned my quiet little corner of the lake into a stage for her personal drama. Every glance I got while walking past her house felt like I was in a spy movie, tense, paranoid, and constantly under observation. Then came the real test, the big community meeting. Karen had sent out invitations far and wide, letting everyone know that I was the source of all HOA disruption. The suspense built as neighbors crowded the room, whispering and craning their necks to see what would happen. Karen arrived early, naturally, standing tall with her clipboard like it was a throne. She immediately started pointing at me and gesturing wildly, recounting all of my offenses, from the crooked dock to the rebellious flower beds, in a voice that could rival a Broadway performance. I sat quietly, letting her build tension, suppressing the urge to roll my eyes. Every accusation was more absurd than the last. By now, the neighbors weren't just watching. They were entertained. I could see them trying not to laugh as Karen made a particularly dramatic gesture, flailing her arms as if summoning the very spirits of HOA compliance. When it was finally my turn, I calmly presented my evidence. Deeds, photos, receipts, witness statements, all meticulously organized. Every single claim she had made fell apart under scrutiny. My dock was fine, my flower beds were fine, and the cabin, well, it had always been mine. The room was silent. Karen's thin smile was gone, replaced with a red flush of fury. She tried to speak, but the council members raised their hands, letting me finish without interruption. The suspense was thick, like the entire room was holding its breath. Even I had to take a moment to appreciate how absurd this all had become. Some neighbors started whispering support, pointing out inconsistencies in Karen's story, while others just stared wide-eyed as the truth sank in. Karen's dramatic flair was crumbling in real time. She fumbled for words, muttered about rules and standards, and finally sat down, defeated. After the meeting, whispers followed me out the door. Half the neighborhood was impressed, half was relieved, and a few were still shaking their heads, muttering, "I can't believe she actually did that." I walked back to my cabin feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and triumph. But the chaos wasn't over. Karen was still out there, plotting, scheming, lurking. She might have lost the battle at the meeting, but she hadn't lost her obsession. I knew she would try something new, something bigger. Over the next few days, I noticed strange behaviors. Neighbors reporting suspicious activity. Notes slipped under doors with vague threats, and Karen herself appearing at odd times, peering through windows or packing the lake path like a hawk. Every knock on the door, every shadow across the porch made my heart race. I started keeping a daily log, documenting every interaction, every note, and every suspicious glance. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Karen had turned my life into a suspense-filled drama, and I was learning fast that preparation was my only weapon. By the end of the week, it was clear. Karen wasn't just an overzealous HOA president. She was a force of nature, unpredictable, relentless, and theatrical. And if I wanted to keep my cabin and my sanity, I would have to face her head-on. Little did I know the ultimate showdown was coming. A confrontation that would test my patience, my nerves, and my ability to survive Karen's theatrics once and for all. The suspense was building, and there was no turning back. The day of the HOA showdown arrived, and I knew there was no turning back. Karen had been planning this performance for weeks, her drama, her accusations, her threats, and now it was finally time for the big reveal. I could feel the tension in the air the moment I stepped into the meeting hall. Neighbors filled the room, whispering, craning their necks, trying to catch a glimpse of the chaos that was about to unfold. Karen stood at the front like a general preparing for battle, clipboard in hand, notes scattered, her hair perfectly coiffed as if she were about to star in a soap opera rather than preside over a community meeting. "You all need to understand the severity of her actions," Karen began, pointing dramatically at me. "She has disrupted the harmony of this community. She refuses to comply with HOA standards, she flaunts rules, and I held up a hand, letting the room absorb her theatrics. This was her moment, and she was giving it everything. I could almost hear the soundtrack of suspense playing in my head as neighbors leaned forward, anticipating the drama. When it was finally my turn, I stood calmly, exhaling slowly. I had my evidence ready, deeds, receipts, dated photos, and witness statements. Every single one of Karen's exaggerated claims would crumble under the weight of facts. I started with the ownership documents. "This cabin," I said, holding up the deed, "has belonged to me for years. I've maintained it according to HOA rules, paid my dues, and never violated any regulations. All of Karen's accusations are unfounded." The room went quiet. Karen's confident posture wavered. She tried to interject some dramatic flourish, but the council raised their hands and signaled for her to remain silent. Every point she made was now exposed for what it was, an exaggeration, a misinterpretation, or outright fabrication. I moved to the photos, showing the dock, the flower beds, and the cabin itself. "Everything she claims as violations has been documented, maintained, and perfectly compliant," I explained. I could see her jaw tightening, her thin smile disappearing, replaced by frustration and panic. Then I presented the witness statements. Neighbors I had quietly spoken to over the past weeks stepped up, confirming the timeline of events, Karen's obsessive visits, and the absurdity of her accusations. The suspense in the room was tangible. Karen's empire of drama was crumbling in real time. She tried one last desperate maneuver. "But she stole my cabin," she shrieked, gesturing wildly, nearly toppling her clipboard. The room collectively paused, some holding their breath, waiting for the council's reaction. The council didn't hesitate. They reviewed the evidence, nodded, and firmly stated that my cabin ownership was indisputable. Karen's accusations were dismissed. The room exhaled in relief, some chuckling at the spectacle, others shaking their heads in disbelief. I felt a wave of triumph and relief wash over me. Karen had been the storm that threatened to ruin my peaceful lake life, but the facts had weathered her fury. She sat down, muttering under her breath, red-faced, defeated, and for the first time silent. Neighbors came up to me afterward, congratulating me on keeping my composure and handling the situation with grace. Some were amused, others were impressed, but all seemed to understand the absurdity of what had just happened. Karen, meanwhile, retreated to her office, still muttering, plotting, and possibly drafting her next dramatic move. As I walked back to my cabin, I reflected on the months of tension, the threats, the letters, the police visit, and the countless times I had wondered if this would ever end. The showdown had proven one thing. Staying calm, collecting evidence, and letting facts speak louder than theatrics was the only way to survive an overzealous HOA president. But even as I settled onto my porch swing, I knew Karen wasn't done scheming. She might have lost this battle, but her obsession was far from over. The suspense of what she might try next lingered in the back of my mind, like dark clouds over a serene lake. And yet I couldn't help but smile. I had survived her drama, preserved my cabin, and proven that reason and evidence could triumph over theatrics. The showdown was over, the neighborhood had witnessed the truth, and I finally felt like I had reclaimed a little peace in my corner of the lake. Little did I know the final act, the one that would truly put Karen in her place, was still waiting just around the corner. After the dramatic showdown, I thought maybe I could finally relax. My cabin was safe. The HOA council had sided with me. Karen's accusations had crumbled like dry toast. For a moment, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I could finally sip my coffee without peeking over my shoulder every 2 minutes. But peace is rarely permanent when Karen is involved. She was still out there somewhere, probably plotting her next scene in this never-ending drama. I expected another confrontation, another ridiculous demand, maybe even another set of flyers highlighting my offenses. But instead, I got something far more satisfying. Neighbors began stopping by, smiles, waves, and congratulations. Some even chuckled, whispering about Karen's theatrics and her theatrical courtroom-style performance at the HOA meeting. One neighbor brought over cookies, another a small potted plant. Everyone seemed to understand, in their own way, that I had survived a storm of epic proportions, and that Karen had spectacularly failed. I spent that afternoon on my porch swing, watching the sun set over the lake, feeling the tension slowly melt away. The water shimmered like gold, the birds chirped, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like my cabin truly belonged to me again. Then came the cherry on top. Karen stormed past my gate, glaring, muttering, and waving her clipboard as if the mere act of existing would somehow restore her dignity. But this time I didn't even flinch. I smiled, tipped my hat, figuratively at least, and waved back. Her face contorted in frustration. She pointed. She shouted something about rules, harmony, and injustice. I didn't understand all of it, but I caught the gist. She had lost. Spectacularly, publicly, and there was nothing she could do about it. A few days later, the HOA sent out a clarification letter to all residents, officially confirming my cabin ownership and reinforcing that all previous accusations against me were baseless. Karen's claims were dismissed, her credibility shaken, and her obsession with my cabin officially documented in HOA history as, well, dramatic at best. The neighbors couldn't stop talking about it. Some were amused, some were relieved, and others quietly congratulated me for keeping my composure. I felt a sense of quiet pride, the kind that comes after surviving chaos and actually winning. Karen, of course, didn't give up completely. She still patrolled the lake paths, clipboard in hand, but now her presence was more comical than threatening. I would catch her peeking over fences or muttering to herself, and I couldn't help but chuckle. My once terrifying HOA president had become predictable and slightly ridiculous. I learned a lot during this ordeal. I learned that calm, patience, and a little humor can go a long way when facing someone obsessed with control. I learned that evidence trumps theatrics every single time. And most importantly, I learned that no matter how absurd life gets, sometimes you just have to lean back, sip your coffee, and enjoy the show. Weeks later, I finally felt safe again. My cabin was mine, my dock was straight, my flower beds were aligned, more or less, and the lake reflected peace instead of chaos. Karen's threats had lost their sting, her dramatic flair was now background noise, and the community had seen the truth. I even joked with a neighbor, I survived HOA Karen, next I'll survive the raccoons. Everyone laughed, and for the first time in months, life felt normal again. That's how it ended. Karen may have called the cops, written letters, and tried to scare me into swapping cabins, but she didn't win. I kept my cabin, my sanity, and my sense of humor. And as I sat on my porch swing, watching the sunset paint the lake in gold and orange, I realized that some victories are sweeter than any cup of coffee. So here's the takeaway. When an overzealous HOA president tries to make your life miserable, stand your ground, stay calm, and keep proof of everything. And most importantly, enjoy the show. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't drama, it's victory, served with a side of humor and a perfect sunset over your lake. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.